Okay, section 1.6, tables and graphs. And the purpose of this lesson is mainly to make sure you understand some of the expectations we'll have anytime you guys create some type of table, bar graph, line graph, how it's supposed to look for algebra class. Okay, we'll begin with tables. And the main thing I want to say about tables is they should always have sort of a logic behind the way they are created. They don't all necessarily need to fit this, Microsoft Excel type of perfect rectangle like this guy here at the bottom. This table about air temperature, very nicely organized. But this guy on top, and hopefully you recognize this guy, periodic table, also just as organized and logically created, just takes on kind of a different shape. So the shape of your table is largely going to depend on the organization of the information inside of it. Hopefully you guys have worked a little bit with the periodic table. This guy is arranged by, I believe, the number of protons and also reactivity of the elements, and that's sort of where they take their certain spot. All right, what I want you to do now is I want you to take a look at this bar graph, and I actually want you to study it. So when I say pause, go ahead and take a minute, and I want you to just look over the graph and get a feel for what's going on here, and then we're going to kind of discuss is it a good graph, is it a not so good graph, where could we maybe improve upon it, that type of thing. So go ahead and hit pause now and analyze that graph on your own for about a minute. So the first thing we want to understand about the graph is, what is the graph talking about? So, obviously we can look at the title. It says reduction in behavior problems using Esteem Builder's complete program. I have no idea what that is, but we should at least try to, think about, where is this coming from? Who is using this Esteem Builder's program? Perhaps it's a school. Maybe it's a school that's having some behavior issues. Seems like pretty intense kind of issues, so could even be like a juvenile detention center. Who knows? But it looks like they're putting some type of behavior modification system into play, and they're trying to figure out how it's working. Okay. Hopefully you've thought of some things that maybe were confusing to you while looking at the graph, or maybe some things that we could improve upon. One of the areas I want to draw your attention to is right over here on the y-axis. I definitely think that there is an issue with the y-axis because the y-axis is not labeled. And anytime you create a graph, whether it's a bar graph, line graph, pie chart, whatever, we need to have labels. And in the case of this bar graph here, both the x-axis and y-axis should be labeled. So think to yourself, maybe what would I label the y-axis here? What are these 50, 100, 150, 200? What are these things counting? And in my mind, these are counting the number. Let's see. In my mind, these are counting the number of behavioral incidences. So that would be the label I would choose. Number of behavioral incidences. Anything else that looks kind of confusing about the graph? Well, one thing I was kind of taken aback by was the color scheme. I see 6 different colors out there, and when I see difference in color, usually I want that color to mean something. And I'm not really quite sure that those 6 colors mean 6 different things. If you look a little bit more closely, this is a double bar graph, and the bar graph on the left stands for school year 94-95. Bar graph on the right stands for school year 95-96. Personally, I think this would be a lot more organized if we gave a particular color to each bar graph. So maybe we could have the first school year all in red. That way we know, hey, these guys are actually all the same school year. And then pick a different color for the following school year, you know, something other than red, perhaps a blue. That way we can really tell that we are comparing 2 different years, not 6 different years. And not to say that you couldn't figure that out, but the thing about graphs, they should be readily understandable. You should not have to think about it. It should just be kind of done for you. So those are some fixes that I would make, and maybe even provide a key explaining what those colors stood for. Okay. Let's look at another example. Go ahead and take a look at this line graph, and I want you to do the same thing. Look at it for about a minute, try to figure out what's going on, and let's see if this is a better graph, if this is a worse graph, are there any areas for improvement. I think this one does a pretty good job. Notice it has a very clear title here. Also notice that we have a nice key that's going to explain the color scheme so that we don't have to think about it. It doesn't bother me that we have 4 different things going on in the graph. That's okay. Notice here that we have the x-axis labeled, well, days in February. My only issue is the y-axis. Even though the y-axis is labeled, it says temperature. Temperature is not specific a label enough. In other words, your label needs to be something measurable, something quantitative. And when I look at this, you know, without studying it, I'm not so certain. Are we talking about Fahrenheit temperature? Or are we talking about Celsius temperature? I can figure out that this probably is Fahrenheit, but I shouldn't have to think about it. Things need to be labeled clearly. So, is the y-axis labeled? Yes. Is it labeled clearly enough? Not really. So we would want to just add in here temperature in degrees Fahrenheit. And then I think that you have a pretty solid line graph. Notice here with the double bar graph before, bar graphs are great for comparison. Line graphs are also good for comparison, but we use line graphs to compare changes over time. So anytime you're looking at the difference over an extended period of time, more often than not, we're going to use a line graph. And then to sum up, these are some tips because you will be creating tables and graphs in this course. Always, 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 always have a title. And that title needs to be clear. You know, the purpose here is to represent data in a clear manner, and that begins with a clear title. That also means that the axes, both the x-axis and the y-axis, okay, must be clearly labeled. And we want that labeled to be something measurable. Okay, so that's all you really need to focus on. A pretty easy video lesson for tonight. And then for your assignment tomorrow, you're probably going to be creating some of these things, so hopefully you've paid attention to some of the things that I have emphasized. All right, have a good one.